Welcome back to Media 7. We're talking about trade unions in the modern media with Ken Douglas, Lila Harry and Graham Hunt. Graham, perhaps we could pick up on what you were talking about before the break, about the newsrooms of yesteryear. Being a union member was actually part of being the culture of being a journalist back then, wasn't it? It even had its own jargon. We didn't have union leaders or spokespeople. We had the chapel father.
Never a chapel mother, always a chapel father. And it's amazing, journalists who were so liberal about gender equity, the way they ran their own union, it was a very male-dominated organisation. And of course the industrial reporter would go drinking with his contacts, almost exclusively male leaders. The whole culture of sort of boozing was part of it. I mean, and one thing, so we look at the 51, Jock Barnes, who was the head of the deregistered Waterside Workers Union, was a legendary drinker, and he and his wife used to slug it out. They would get so drunk and they would punch each other, and they did that for 50 years until they eventually broke up. Now, can you imagine today a union leader punching his wife or his wife punching him, having that sort of relationship? But that was accepted and known because that was a sort of boozy culture. These were men who'd left school at 13 or 14, gone, as had many of the journalists as well. Not well-educated people, not particularly touchy-feely about things. These were hard men, and I think if we look around now, we don't see those in leaders in politics. Matt McCarthy is an exception to that, possibly, but the face of the modern unionism and the face of modern journalism, a lot softer, a lot more accommodating, but less of an edge to it, I think.
How many journalists do you think are union members now?
I would say it's probably fewer than 20% of the whole workforce. And let's face it, about 2/3 of people entering journalism are women, and most of the new editors are being appointed are women. So they don't relate to that old world culture, which was a drinking culture.
Do you think that's a problem, Lila? That unions have this...
That we don't go drinking with the journos. We don't get asked.
We need to get asked.
We have children to go home to.
It does strike me, though, that particularly with issues in the media industry, it tends to be the unions who are the sole voice. You look at Simon Collins' Save Our Subs protest at the Qantas Media Awards a few years ago. They were absolutely right about APN's PageMasters experiment. It hasn't worked. And there was no one else there to say that. So it suggests that there's some value there.
Well, all unions are as focused on issues within the industry these days as they are focused on bread and butter wage bargaining issues, and the EPMU have been running a campaign campaign around the sort of ethical and organisational approach of the media being driven by their journalist members. But I think there are a diminishing number of journalists who are unionised. I mean, my understanding is that it's largely within the former or current state-owned media, so Radio New Zealand, Television New Zealand, less likely to be the case with the commercial stations, TV3, virtually non-union, and newspapers, some of the old guard.
I suspect you'll find that freelancers like Graham and I also aren't unionised because there's no real place for us there. There's actually not a lot going on for us, with union support. I mean,
I've got a good boss. I think it's a bit dangerous to get into sort of harking back to the so-called good old days, because they were never bloody good. They're never good for truck drivers in any case, I can tell you. So I don't have this sort of love of reinventing yesteryear at all. I think that workers are much more knowledgeable now. They have access to much more information. They're much more effective in the struggles that they take up. But they do not command the central media space because they do not have the same degree of impact that the old structured bargaining gave out. And some of the strike struggles that have gone on in most recent years have been very creative and very intelligently run. When you stopped the waterfront, you stopped the whole national economy. And that's why 1951, 1913, the 1890 maritime strike was so significant in the country's history. I don't think that will ever happen again in the same way, because the new industries...
And some people would say that's a good thing.
Well, but who wins out of strikes? Like, strikes, with due respect, only create a bargaining space. They're just setting the environment for a negotiation that's going to take place. Why couldn't they negotiate beforehand? Most time the workers take strikes because employers do not want to talk to them, or they've got another agenda. The number of strikes that have been created by provocation. The meat industry, when it knew it was coming to relicensing for the hygiene standards for the European Union, would regularly provoke stoppages in the meat industry. The tragedy was is the shed delegate would take them out before they could think about it, and so save the company 8 or 9, 10 weeks' wages. So the relationships have changed. They need to be put into a focus. This job summit, if it doesn't do something to dramatically halt the exodus of skills out of New Zealand, we won't have a recovery that'll go anywhere. If we lose that skills base, and that's the real challenge, and that's what unions are trying to take up and defend.
So that's a goal that everyone can relate to. I wonder whether there's a need, you know, particularly in presenting the message to the media, for the unions to define their community of interest. It used to be simple. You represented everyone who earned a wage. It's not that simple now, is it?
No, and it's, I mean, one of the projects I'm involved in with a group of unions at the moment is to provide an alternative route into the union movement for workers who don't fit our new model of organising, which is largely based on our ability to resource and negotiate enterprise collective agreements, and that is an enormously resource intensive activity. If you don't fit that box, if you're in a high turnover industry, you're a casual worker, you're in a small workplace, it's not going to be cost effective to bargain a collective agreement. At the moment, we're not really providing a home for you. So, I mean, we are actively now looking at how do you reach out and provide a place in the union movement for workers whose wages and conditions aren't going to be settled in that way, and as a political organising base. I mean, the campaign to lift the minimum wage to $15 an hour, were it successful, will have far more impact than almost the entire sort of collective bargaining rounds of the country put together in terms of its impact on low pay.
I thought one of the interesting things about the 1951 clip we saw was that the unions were blacked out of the media, and so they started printing their own newspapers. And nowadays you have all those tools at your disposal like anyone else.
And we don't use them. I mean, it's a shocker. The state of union media is truly disappointing. I mean, our union has restarted a regular newspaper. It's pretty highly regarded within the movement for providing sort of up-to-date, broad-based coverage. But as far as I know, we're the only union producing now a newspaper on a regular basis for our members. We have, you know, some unions producing magazine-style publications. They're pretty much PR oriented.
But are you on Facebook?
I am personally.
And that's a serious question, because
I don't know whether, you know,
if you actually want to engage younger workers, then surely you have to be there. You have to be doing Facebook.
No,
you have to be doing blogs.
There was certainly a Facebook group set up for the opposition to the 90 Days bill. We're about to launch a campaign which will be around the implementation of that legislation on the 1st of March, which includes a whole web-based dimension, including social networking access. We are looking into how, you know, the new media can be used by unions as a way of organising and communicating, not just informing or propagandising, but actually connecting people together in a different space.
Well, giving people news they can use, that people seem to respond very positively to useful information.
Yes, they do, but there's also a lot of clutter there, and it's, you know, working out how effective really are these kind of new forms of networking for getting people to, in the end, do something real. Because, you know, we only change our economic relationships through direct engagement. There can't be a virtual wage round or a virtual strike that is really going to be effective in closing that wage gap.
Just finally, clearly we are entering an extremely severe economic crisis. It looks like unemployment here will reach 10% or slightly more, maybe 20% in Ireland. How do you think that is going to affect the way that the union movement is perceived, the likelihood of the media going to the union movement? Because people are going to be angry, aren't they?
Well, there's still issues, you see, and I'd like to just tell you about my tie. This is Mickey Mouse. My granddaughter gave it to me when she was 12 because she did a school project on the ILO, and she came home to me on my birthday and said, "I bought you a tie, Granddad. Why is it that Mickey Mouse has worldwide protections and workers don't?" Now, if the media want to do something, there's the story.
Is that a story for you, Graham?
Well, I think it is a story, but you know, it's interesting taking up Lida's point. Where the unions haven't taken the opportunity is in the digital and electronic media. you know, they still do tend to think in newspapers and newsletters. It's interesting, in the old days, the union movement worked hand in glove with the Labour Party, so the, you know, newspapers like the Southern Cross employed only, you know, Labour-leaning journalists, and these people then were often active in the party. There's almost none of that, and yet you look at the last general election.
Does that mean they have to be a broader church now?
They have to be a broader church, but I mean, what we saw in the last election, the political parties are using blogging all the time. This is an organised thing, it doesn't happen by chance, but it doesn't happen within the union movement, and the employers don't do it either. And it seems to me that we've got two fairly fossilised organisations, employers and unions, who are still locked in old technology. Now, you know, I talk to my son and daughter, both, you know, young adults now, and they don't read newspapers at all, but they know what's going on, and their life is around websites and it's around information that they get electronically or digitally. They don't, and yet why are we talking to them through newspapers? I love newspapers, and I come from a newspaper background. They have a good role, but that is not the way you get through to all people. I don't know how many people here, you know, read newspapers or even subscribe to them, but probably only a handful in this room. So how else do you communicate? You communicate by other means.
You've got to be on Facebook, Lila.
Well, we are getting into it, Russell, I can assure you, but we have an organising motivation here, and it's how you utilise those forms of communication to get people to do things, to be active, to take some responsibility for the way that they engage, you know, with each other and their employers, and to do something together. And those can be very fragmenting ways of communicating too, and we don't want it to substitute for people actually connecting. And a newspaper in a tea room is still a very standard, you know, proposition, a very good way of getting people talking about something. Not dismissing it. I mean, we organise every activity, a dispute now using SMS, alternative forms of communication. I mean, we're actually not dinosaurs, and we are kind of with the program, but we're trying to sort of catch up too.
I'd never call you a dinosaur.
Back to Jurassic Park.
We do have to wrap up now, but thank you, Ken, thank you, Lila, and thank you, Graham. We're going to go to a completely different place and a different sort of protest now with this week's Newsmash. It was the triumph of the nerds. A grassroots protest prompted the government to unexpectedly delay implementation of the controversial Section 92A of the Copyright Act, which would have required ISPs to disconnect customers accused of copyright infringement from this week.
They say they're close. We're giving them another month to do that.
If no agreement is reached in a month on an accompanying code of conduct, the controversial law will be suspended. On another front of the copyright war, Sweden's government finally brought its case against an export it would rather Sweden wasn't so well known for, the infamous Pirate Bay file-sharing website. That didn't go too well either.
They actually dropped half of their case on the second day because they realised that they'd made a technical error on the first day and argued incorrectly about how BitTorrent actually works.
But perhaps it all calls for a song of cheer in troubled times. BarelyPolitical.com's Obama Girl is back with a nerdcore barnstormer.
We are ready to lead once more, once more, once more. The challenges we face are real, but they will be met once more.
We're about to see a change from Barack Hussein. Scrub it, change it good. Change the way I brush my teeth, the way I sweep, the way I eat beef, and broke a piece in the Middle East.
And HBO seems happy enough to leave multiple copies of this instant Kiwi classic all over your YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, Flight of the Conchords, Too Many Dicks on the Dance Floor.
Too many dudes with too many dicks, too close to my shit, too hard to meet chicks. I need better odds, more broads, less rods. I came to do battle, skedaddle with the counter rods. Too many men, too many boys, too many misters, not enough sisters, too much time on too many hands, not enough ladies, too many mans.
You'll be able to watch the whole episode, directed by music video maestro Michel Gondry, on Prime TV soon. Modern gender studies with Flight of the Conchords there. After the break, Alfie's baby, maybe.